Hi, I'm Greg Corombos. My guest at this time is Larry Haas. He served as spokesman for the White House Budget Office during the Clinton administration. He was communications director for Vice President Al Gore, and he's now a senior fellow at the American Foreign Policy Council. We want to get his insights as the Democratic presidential field prepares for primaries or caucuses in 16 more states over the next 12 days, and determine whether Democrats are nervous about the nomination being uncertain for months to come, or whether that's just media hype at this point. And Larry, thanks so much for being with us.
Nice to be here, Greg.
Well, the conventional wisdom, when you can let me know what you think that's worth, at least from most of the media right now, is that Democrats are increasingly worried that Bernie Sanders is going to get a clear plurality of delegates in this crowded field, and that will either lead to the party nominating a socialist or denying the nomination to the candidate with the most delegates. So how high is the concern in the party as you can detect it right now?
Oh, this is more than a media story. I mean, alarm bells are going off in Democratic circles. There's no question about it. And after last night and the view that Michael Bloomberg did not do as well as expected, and the fact that Bernie Sanders seemed to have a pretty clear field last night, other than some minor critiques of him, has only raised the alarm bells even more. Democrats are very concerned not only about losing to President Trump, but losing any chance with Sanders as the nominee of retaking the Senate and even possibly losing the House. So I can't emphasize to you enough how much the alarm bells are going off in Democratic circles, other than if you happen to be a supporter of Bernie Sanders, in which case you're thrilled about the way things are going.
So, Larry, you mentioned that there's great concern that not only the party could lose the presidential race, but not win the Senate and even possibly lose the House. In these head-to-head matchups, though, it obviously varies from state to state and nationally depending upon the poll. But a lot of times Sanders isn't necessarily doing the worst, and in some states he's actually ahead of Trump. There was just a Quinnipiac poll out showing that he's ahead of Trump, for example, in Michigan and Pennsylvania, not so much in Wisconsin. So why are folks so certain that he'd lose?
Because the Republican onslaught against his positions has not begun yet. And in fact, if you look at last night's debate, I think that's really where the criticism is going to be. The first person to speak was Bernie Sanders about Michael Bloomberg. And then Bloomberg got a chance to respond, and he immediately said, we can't win with a nominee who is proposing to take private health insurance away from 160 million Americans who overwhelmingly like the health care that they have. And that's only one of his positions. He's got a variety of other positions in terms of, free tuition and higher education and all the rest, which really frighten people when they focus on it. Moderate Republicans, centrists, independents, moderate Democrats even. And the reason that Democrats are so concerned is that while you're right about the state of the race today, there's great skepticism that Sanders will be able to withstand the criticism that he will face from the Trump campaign, criticism both legitimate and obviously illegitimate, but the criticism that he will face, and there's a sense that his support, to the extent that he has it among centrists and independents, will rapidly evaporate.
Is there any concern what kind of president he would be from a Democratic perspective if he actually were to win?
Well, I think the sense, frankly, is that these measures would not really get enacted into law. He wouldn't have 100% Democratic support, even for, his Medicare for All proposal, much less some of the other outlandish proposals. So, no, I don't think there's a real fear that somehow Sanders is going to get elected and we're going to turn into the United States of socialism. I don't hear that concern, and it's not a concern, frankly, that I have. All eyes in Democratic circles right now are focused on winning. And the great concern is that Sanders is not the way to win the presidency, and he's not the way to win Democratic seats below him on the ballot.
Here's a clip from the debate on Wednesday where Bloomberg was talking about, kind of as you mentioned a moment ago, Larry, that the party should not be going down the path towards socialism, whether defined as Bernie Sanders defines it or pretty much anyone else.
You own a large company. Would you support what Senator Sanders is proposing?
Absolutely not. I can't think of ways that would make it easier for Donald Trump to get reelected than listening to this conversation. It's ridiculous. We're not going to throw out capitalism. We tried that. Other countries tried that. It was called communism, and it just didn't work.
I guess Sanders didn't think there would be the same brand of socialism there in terms of his groan. But Larry, what's the appetite for that message in the Democratic Party right now? There's been a pretty fierce debate over whether capitalism is a good word or a dirty word.
Well, I'm reminded of the Will Rogers line about being a Democrat. I don't belong to any organized political party. I'm a Democrat. The party is split, and particularly young people have more of a willingness to go down a socialist path for all sorts of reasons, not the least of which is they haven't really learned much about socialism through school, and they didn't experience the Cold War and see the real threats from these totalitarian regimes on the left. I mean, their experience with, to the extent that they have an experience with socialism, it's Chinese socialism, which, as you know, Greg, is very market-driven these days. But I think it's fair to say that if you look around the world, you still see socialist catastrophe. Venezuela probably being the very best example of it right now. But it's not something that people are living in a way that they lived it during the Cold War. And so to the extent that people have a historical perspective, they realize how absurd some of these Sanders proposals are. And to the extent that they do not, they are more likely to have what you might call the socialist temptation. But there's no way to really summarize this because the party is split on that very issue.
Speaking of which, what's the chatter from your friends and other folks you talk to with connections to the Democratic Party about Michael Bloomberg getting into this race and how he's spending all that money and how that's being received?
Once again, it sort of depends what kind of a Democrat you are. If you're a moderate Democrat, you want to win this thing, and you see the easiest path to beating Trump is to nominate someone who will have not just Democratic support, but will be able to reassure moderate Republicans who have no taste for Donald Trump but are scared of who the Democrats might nominate. And the same would go for independents. So to the extent you're a moderate Democrat, frankly, if your focus is on winning, you're thrilled that Bloomberg is in the race because you think that he's someone who can appeal to all of these people in the middle. To the extent that you're someone who has got the kind of leftist fervor at the moment, you're more likely to support Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren and see, Michael Bloomberg as, an old-fashioned plutocrat who, in a sense, is not down the line on Democratic orthodoxy, so you're not excited by him.
Well, one of the things we used to see a lot, Larry, in the primary process in both parties was that after the first few contests, the herd thinned pretty quickly. But we don't really see that so much anymore, partly due to the fact that we have such massive-sized fields to begin with, over 20 Democrats this time. What was it, 16, 17 candidates for the Republicans in 2016, and so it takes longer to play out. So right now, while most folks are going for the non-Bernie vote, maybe Elizabeth Warren's trying to keep a foot on both sides, everyone on that stage looks like they're probably in this for a little while, and even Tom Steyer's polling pretty well in the next two states here. He didn't even make the debate stage on Wednesday night. How does the non-Bernie logjam get untangled?
Well, this is the danger, really, for the party. I mean, this is precisely the mirror image of how Donald Trump got nominated in 2016 on the other side, which is you had this whole constellation of fairly mainstream conservative Republicans who were competing against one another and sort of taking support from one another, from Marco Rubio to John Kasich to Jeb Bush and down the line. now on the Democratic side, you basically have, when you think about the moderate or centrist Democratic vote, you've got Bloomberg and Biden and Klobuchar and to some extent Buttigieg all kind of competing with that same terrain. All of that is music to the ears of Bernie Sanders. Until the moderates, and presuming they do, and they may not, but until the moderates thin out on their side and there's more of a head-to-head contest with Bernie being the, presumptive leftist candidate and someone else, Bloomberg or someone else, being the presumptive moderate candidate, until that happens, we're not going to really see where the party's going. And if that doesn't happen, if all of these people stay in the race, that just clears the field, really, for them to carve up, as I said, the moderate part of the party, and for Bernie to continue to lead the leftist part of the party and lead it enough that he's likely to get the nomination.
And so unless there's a consistent other who stands out from now through Super Tuesday, it sounds like you think this field's going to stay about the same size for the foreseeable future.
Look, Super Tuesday has got an awful lot of races in it. And to the extent that Biden does not do well, I could see him being a casualty. The same may be true of Klobuchar. The others look pretty solid. I mean, Sanders obviously does. I think Warren's probably got enough strength to keep going. Buttigieg did very well in the first two, so you presume that he's going to stay in this. And if nothing else, Michael Bloomberg has got oodles of money. So of the 6 that we saw on the stage, yes, at least 4 of them I think will survive no matter what happens on Super Tuesday.
A lot to watch and even a lot more states to go after that. But as Yogi Berra used to say, it gets late pretty early out there. So we'll be watching. Larry, thank you very much for your time. We really appreciate it.
Nice to be here, Greg. Thank you.
Larry Haas, former spokesman for the Clinton White House Budget Office, communications director for Vice President Al Gore, now a senior fellow at the American Foreign Policy Council. I'm Greg Corombos reporting for Radio America.